Good day. Welcome to our Entrepreneurship Master Program. We're looking at the skills program project management, and today we're looking at the module project implementation, monitoring and control. Just maybe as a way of background, when we started this skills program, we went through the introductory lesson, and then we did program project techniques and principles, where we're highlighting what in terms of the principles of implementing a project and different techniques that you can use to implement a project. Then we looked at the planning phase, the project planning, where you initiate the project, you develop a project plan that needs to be implemented, and then we further looked at the risk management module, where you identify potential risk in a project, basically identifying factors that may negatively impact the project, and you implement the mitigating strategies. And today we are looking at the module project implementation, monitoring and control. So basically what we'll be looking at is, how do you implement a project? And then as you implement a project, you need to continuously monitor that project, and you make sure that you control it. Remember, a project is activities that you do to achieve a certain objective. So you have an objective that you want to achieve, then you establish a project. So you're going to have a team, you're going to have resources allocated to that specific project, and then you have the outcome that you want to achieve. So you're going to invest resources in the project. Then on the planning phase, you basically develop a project plan, what is called a project plan. And if you don't know what is a project plan, go back to our lesson on project planning. We go in detail in terms of explaining what is the project plan, what's supposed to be in the project plan, how do you do a project plan. So now we're at the stage where we have developed a project plan. We've conducted our risk analysis, and we developed our risk profile. We've profiled our risk, and we know the type of risk that we expect from this project, and how we're gonna, if they occur, how we're gonna mitigate them. So today we're looking specifically in terms of how do you implement a project. Okay, so during the implementation stage or the implementation phase of the project, the main thing is you have a team that you need to manage to make sure that team execute their responsibilities based on the project plan that we have developed. Okay, so when you develop a project plan, you will have identified who are going to be your team members. Then you need to make sure that the team members understand their role and responsibilities and their key performance areas. Because if you start implementing the project and your team is not on board in terms of their key responsibilities, what is expected from them, then the project might experience challenges. Because remember, when we were talking about the project planning, to say most projects actually fail from the planning stage, where they haven't planned properly, they didn't allocate the resources, maybe the timelines are not realistic or are not achievable. And one of the main things is that you find that you have not allocated a team or appropriate team, or a team that has sufficient or the necessary skills to execute this project. So you need to make sure that before you start with the execution, make sure your team is ready. You have a team with the necessary skills to be able to implement this project, and it's ready, it's available, because you might start implementing the project, start executing activities, but only to learn that actually your team members are not ready, or your team doesn't have the necessary skills to execute this project. And if that is the case, then you might experience challenges with the implementation of the project. So the first thing that you need to make sure when it comes to implementation is your team ready. do they know their responsibilities? Have you guys gone through the project plan, identified who's supposed to do, allocated all the responsibilities, knowing that who's supposed to do what? Okay. So when it comes to a team, obviously in a team, you have a project manager who is the person who's overseeing the project in totality. And then you have the team members who have different responsibilities. So some team members, you might find that they are approving members. They have to approve certain activities. Or they are responsible managers, meaning, or responsible individuals, meaning they are responsible of performing specific tasks within the project. Or they are consultants, basically meaning they don't necessarily have an approval authority, or they don't have they are not responsible for a specific activity, but they are maybe experts that you consult, or you generally maybe request feedback from them through consultation and all that, because they might have the skill that maybe the other team members don't have, but they're not responsible for a specific task within the project. So those become consultants. You will be consulting them. When you prepare your project charter or the work breakdown, then you will indicate this team member, these are the team members' responsibility. For instance, you find that on one activity, I might be responsible to execute that activity. So you will allocate me as a responsible team member on that specific activity. Maybe on another activity within the same project, I might be a consultant where they have to consult me before they do certain things. So for that activity, you will allocate me as a consultant. And on maybe another activity that has got nothing to do with me, but I just need to be informed. So you'll allocate me as informed. Normally they use the I on project charter, or the project or work breakdown. So if you have specific responsibility in the project, you must be part of the project team. So you need to make sure that first thing you analyze your project team, and you make sure that each project team member understands their key objectives or key responsibilities. For this activity, am I responsible for it? If you're not responsible for it, obviously you're not supposed to account for it. Only the person who is responsible for that activity is the person who is supposed to account. And then if you are a consultant, just make sure that during the meetings, during the engagement, if you are not consulted, then you need to raise that within the project team. And then if you are supposed to be informed is just being let know. They let you know that certain activities have taken place. So it doesn't mean you have any responsibilities. It's just that you, as part of the team, you're supposed to be informed, not necessarily do anything about it. It's like on the email where they put in for your information. You're just being informed of the activities that are going on. So the team is clear. On the team, there are 4 responsibilities that you can allocate a team member for each and every activity. Remember, these responsibilities can change. I can be responsible in one activity, but maybe a consultant on another and approver on another. So different activities within a project will have different individuals with different responsibilities. So it doesn't mean if you say I'm responsible, it means I'm responsible for each and every activity on that project. It is possible that I can be responsible for each and every activity on that project, but it doesn't necessarily mean if you're saying I'm responsible for one activity and I have to be responsible for all. So the duties that you can allocate is 1, responsibility, meaning this person is responsible to execute. 2, an approval responsibility. This person approves that activity. Before the activity takes place, it needs a person to approve it. 3, you have a consultant who the person that you go to for inputs or guidance, and then you have into people that you're supposed to inform. So those are information only. So those are the 4 responsibilities in a project for team members. Obviously, when you're allocating the team members to responsibilities, you'll take into account their technical expertise and technical know-how and experience and all that, so that you make sure that you allocate appropriate team members to an appropriate project activity. Because you might give me an activity to design something. I'm an accountant, so that might be difficult. I might not be able to execute that responsibility the way it's supposed to be executed. But if you give me maybe a responsibility of costing the project or something financial related, then that might be more suitable for me as an accountant. So when you're allocating the team members, make sure that you take into account their key competencies. Give responsibilities based on key competencies rather than favoritism or something like that. Now, as I said, we're talking about execution, right? So you need to make sure that your team is ready to start executing. So the project manager is responsible to making sure that the team dynamics and the people involved in the project are managed according to the project plan. So the ultimate responsibility of the team is with the project manager. Yes, the project manager might delegate some of the responsibilities to maybe some managers or some technical people with experience or whatever, or supervisors. But the ultimate responsibility of managing the team is with the project manager. So what the project manager needs to do is to outline the management process. So you find like in an organization you have delegation of authorities, how the reporting lines and all that. So those need to be clarified upfront before the project starts, or when you are busy with the execution, so that the reporting lines are clear, the delegation lines are clear, so that when you are executing, you're not going to experience challenges where team members, they don't know where they're supposed to get instructions, or if they're experiencing problems, they don't know who to report to, they don't know who's supposed to be responsible. So that can be done by using an organogram, for argument's sake, any other document that will be able to show who's responsible for what in this project and who's reporting to who within the project, so that everyone understands that from the project perspective, these are the line of authority, this is how responsibilities have been delegated to each member of the team. So the organogram, or the chart that shows who is responsible for what, when, and who's managing who, it needs to be clear upfront, so that the team members, they don't get confused in the process of execution. Okay, and then there must also be some type of communication plan, so that, remember, when you're executing a project, once you start, things get muddied and you get busy, people get caught in their work, they'll forget that they still have to communicate to the other project team members. So you need to establish the communication lines earlier on, so that you know when you're going to communicate, when feedback are happening. So if I depending on the size of the project, right? You might find that if it's not a long-term project, you can have a Monday debrief, or a Monday meetings, or a weekly meeting. But if it's a long-term project, you might have a monthly meetings where you're going to go back and report on the update, what happened, who did what is the progress on the project and all that. So you need to make sure that you develop your communication plan earlier on in the execution phase, so that each team member will understand when they're supposed to give feedback and when they're supposed to receive feedback, so that you manage the expectations, you manage the flow of the project. Because if you don't lock down the communication process. That might cause challenges for your project, because your team members might not know when to communicate and when not to, when to give feedback. You might find that the project manager or their seniors are expecting a report on a certain time or a certain date. But because the communication strategy was not communicated upfront, then that might cause delays, might cause friction within the team. So to avoid conflicts within the team, make sure that you outline one, the organogram or the structure of the organization, not of the organization, of the project, in terms of who is reporting to who and who is given responsibilities to who. And secondly, make sure that you know how you, as the team, how are you going to communicate? Because there are different ways of communicating. So, and there are different preferences in terms of when, how people prefer to share information. So you need to make sure that as a project team, you guys have decided on your communication plan to say, this is how I'm going to communicate. This is how we're going to communicate. Because that's important, because communication in any project, because it's critical. Because once you start working, things will fall between the cracks because there's lack of communication. And if there are challenges, a person might not know who to report to or how to address it. And that might delay how the problems get resolved. And if the problems take unnecessarily long period of time to be resolved, then that will result in the project being delayed. And you might fall into that 70% late delivery of projects. And we know most of the time, if the project is late, that means cost overruns. Okay, it doesn't necessarily follow, but most of the time, if there are delays in the project, then there will be corresponding cost overruns. Because of maybe the planning, as I said, that the key where most projects fail is planning. But the second one, which is the most important one, is the team. Communication, the team, you need to make sure that you have a competent team to execute the project. You need to make sure that the process, there's organic, in terms of the process that needs to be followed. You have the organogram. People know who are they reporting into, how they're going to receive the information and all that. And the last one is the communication plan, meaning how you're going to communicate, how often you're going to have meetings, how often you're going to give feedback, how often you're going to meet stakeholders, how often you're going to give progress reports to the sponsor. So these three things are the basic of, call it human resource management, or the team, managing the team. Manage the team based on best practices. Make sure that you comply with your labor laws. Make sure that you comply with the contract of the people or of the team. That's the thing that you need to make sure that you're dealing with your team members fairly, and make sure that you give them the processes, how they're supposed to communicate within the project, who are they reporting to, how do they supposed to address their issues with the project in terms of communication, in terms of coming up with solutions. But most importantly, make sure that you appoint competent and suitable people for the project. Okay, the person must be competent, but not only competent, they must also be suitable for that specific project. Because sometimes you can have competent people, but to only find that when it comes to the execution, they are not suitable. Then you're going to start experiencing a lot of conflicts within the project. And working in a project where you have unhappy employees or unhappy team members, then that will tend to delay the progress or the delivery on the project. So it's very, very important when you're looking at the team members to say, put the right people in the bus or on in the bus. Then make sure that you have a organogram in terms of the reporting and all that, and the delegation of authority, and make sure that you have a communication plan to make sure that whatever is going on in the project, everyone or all the team members know how to communicate, how to engage, so that it makes it easier for everyone to understand the source of information, the feedback, how the feedback is given, and things like that. And now we're going to talk about the actual execution. Okay, now we just discussed in terms of the team dynamics, who is responsible for the team. I've highlighted that your project manager is the person who's running the project, who's mainly responsible for the team performance, team morale, and making sure that the objectives of the project and the activities are achieved. So now I'm moving away from the team topic. I'm going into the actual execution and or implementation of the project. So when implementing the project, remember, you can plan all you want. You can do the plans, beautiful plans and all that. But if you can't implement those plans, then they become useless. You might have wasted time trying to develop those plans if you fail to execute. So execution is the main thing for project management, because you are actually doing project management so that you can implement the project according to the requirements or according to the needs of the customer or the needs of the sponsor. Okay, so some projects are sponsored by maybe it might be management, it might be executive, it might be whoever that sponsor. So you need to execute the project according to their needs. And there are some projects that you are implementing for the benefit of the customers. So even for you, when you're executing a project for the customer, like if you are in a tender business, you're executing for government. If you are doing project maybe for private companies, like for mining companies, you are executing the project, or you're implementing that project for the business that have given you the contract or the tender. So the important part is to make sure that you execute that project according to the needs or the objectives that were set by your customer or have been set by your sponsor. If you are not doing it for the customer, you're doing it for the sponsor. So why is project execution important? As I said, that depending on which research you read, about 80% of projects, they say they either on cost overrun or time. They're delayed, they're delivered late. So if you have a proper execution strategy or project execution strategy, that will gonna help you to make sure that your project, you do it within the timeline or within the budget. That's one of the main benefits, because that's actually key for a project for a project manager to make sure that a project is completed within that time frame that has been given and within the budget. And if you execute your project properly, you will also achieve the objective of the project. That's one benefit, and which is the key benefit. And if you execute the project properly according to the project plan, it will also boost the team morale. People will be happy there. Your team will be happy that they've executed the project the way it's supposed to be executed. Because if you don't execute the way it's supposed to, then that leads to frustrations within the team. You'll end up having a demotivated team. So if you execute the project the way you're supposed to, even the team morale gets a boost. But most importantly, because those first two, as I said, they are critical. They're important to make sure that you do it within the budget, you achieve the objectives, and you do it within the given time frame, and make sure that you don't frustrate your team. The second one, to make sure that your team gets motivated as they do things the way they're supposed to be done, rather than being frustrated when you are not executing the way you're supposed to be executing. Okay. The last one, which is key, is your stakeholders will be very happy. Depending on who are you doing the project for? It might be a project sponsor. Let's say you got a contract from, I don't know, a NGO to do community upliftment. So if you do that project the way it's supposed to be done, you execute it perfectly, you finish it within the time frame, you finish it within the budget, you achieve the objective, your customer will be happy. The person that appointed you will be happy with your performance, and that will build reputation, your reputation within the space. Because if you are a project manager and you appoint, let's say you appoint a small business to execute a project, and they complete it on time, within budget, and you still meet your objectives, obviously you're gonna rave about it. If you have another project, you will give them an opportunity because they've done things the way you wanted them to do. So it's very, very important. Project execution is the key, and it's also what maybe damages the reputation of small businesses, because many companies, they avoid giving business to small businesses because of the execution. You give a small company a project and they just not execute it the way they're supposed to execute it, and ultimately you find that you have overspent on that project, or it's taking longer than it should. Or if it didn't take longer than it should and it's not over budget, you might find that it's not meeting the objectives that the appointing person or the company that appointed that SME was expecting. Then what happens? That means in future, the person will be skeptical considering you for another project because you failed to execute. So as a business, to build your reputation, you need to make sure that if you are given a project, if you are given an opportunity, make sure that you execute it the way you're supposed to execute it. Then, now, with that being said, okay, now that takes us into the actual, how do you implement a project? Okay, so we're going to go into detail in terms of how you implement a project, and the aim is to assist you to build the skill and make sure that you follow certain principles when you're executing the project, so that you can execute it within budget, within the timelines, and you still meet the objectives that the stakeholder or the sponsor is looking for. Right, so now, how do you execute, or how do you implement a project? So basically, the first thing is you need to make sure that you evaluate the project plan. Remember, when you're doing the planning, we spoke about the project plan. How do you develop the project plan, and what must be in the project plan? So now what you do when you come to the execution, make sure that you revisit the project plan to understand what you have planned to achieve. Okay. You revisit it and you evaluate it, and we spoke about the team, right? You already have the team. So when you're doing this evaluation, you do it with your team. Now, the next step that you need to do, now you come to the execution plan. It's the activities that you need to define, the activities that you're gonna implement, or the activities that you're gonna undertake for you to implement the project, right? You're gonna look at who's gonna do those activities, how long they're gonna take, the activity, because you need to be able to allocate the time. There might be in the project plan in terms of the activities that needs to be undertaken, but obviously now you're at the stage of implementation. So the part of reviewing your original plan is to ascertain the actual hours that will be required, or the actual days that will be required to do certain activities. So you make sure that the time is allocated, the activities are clearly, the tasks are clearly defined, the team is allocated responsibilities, and the implementation plan is clear in terms of which activities needs to be done first. So you need to do your scheduling. So you schedule project in terms of the activities and the individual. So each activity must have an individual attached to it, resources attached to it, and the time attached to it, so that it's clear who's going to do the activity, what resources that person needs, how long it's going to take them, and what is the purpose or the objective of that activity. So that you put it in the project schedule. You can use our Super Dealmaker app. It gives you schedules. You just have to put in the resources and all that. So we made it very, very easy for you to develop a project plan. So use our Super Dealmaker application. It will help you to implement a project plan, and it will draft the schedule for you. You don't have to worry about because sometimes you can do it on Excel, which works fine, but our app does it. It makes it easier, and you can easily reference, you can easily make changes. So, and you can keep it in your profile, so you don't have to save it somewhere else and still have to search for it when you need to implement it. So you do the project scheduling, where you allocate responsibilities, you allocate the resources that are required, you allocate the time to the activities. So it means you are sort of doing, in finance they'll call it budgeting. You are budgeting your activities to say who's going to execute, which activities are going to be executed, when they will be executed, and the resources that are required to execute that, and who's going to execute those activities. Those are the 4 key things. And then now you look at the risk component. Remember, we did the risk assessment. So from the risk assessment, what are the risks for us to when we're implementing this project, so that you keep them in mind? You bring them in your execution plan to say what are the risks that are involved, so that as you're executing, you keep those risks in mind, so that you will be able to see when those risks are materializing, and you can take corrective actions sooner than later. So you bring the risk assessment, and on the execution plan as well, in terms of stakeholders, you need to revisit your stakeholders to see if the stakeholders that you had planned for, are they still relevant now when you are executing. So you need to relook at the stakeholders and include the approach, how you're going to engage the stakeholders, because stakeholder engagement is very, very, very important, because you can do all these plans, but if you don't have your stakeholders on board, meaning stakeholders are people who have interest in your project, like maybe it might be government, it might be communities, it might be your funder, it might be your creditors, it might be your suppliers, it might be your customers as well. So you need to identify the key stakeholders, and that we've done in the planning session, where we explain how you identify your stakeholders. So now here on the execution phase, you need to revisit your stakeholders to see how relevant are they. Are they still relevant even after, I don't know, remember we were talking about different projects here. Some projects might take long. You might have done your planning last year, and now you might be executing a year later. Then it means your stakeholders might have changed. So you need to revisit that to see if your stakeholders are still those stakeholders, or they are representative. And then you engage with them, and then you develop the engagement plan or a communication plan with the stakeholders, knowing how you're going to deal with them during the execution. Because sometimes when you do a project, you plan it on your own. Yes, you might maybe contact them and ask them a few things, but generally you plan it on your own. So what you need to do now, you need to go speak to those stakeholders, revisit their interest. Are they still interested in the project? Understand their objectives, and get the sense in terms of how much support can you get from those stakeholders. If they are stakeholders that will be able to give you support. Okay, you revisit the stakeholders and you develop a plan around those stakeholders in terms of how you're going to engage with them, and you make the necessary changes to your stakeholder engagement plan. All right, that's on the stakeholder side. We have the first thing that we did is, obviously it was on the team. We've decided on the team, we allocated the responsibility and all that, and now we've done the activities where we've defined the activities that needs to take place. We know when they're supposed to take place. We know the budget. We know who's supposed to do them, and we know their timelines, right? Now we identify the risks, and we know which risks are likely or they might occur, and we have that mitigation strategy. And then we just analyze our stakeholders now to see who are the key stakeholders, and then we revisited the communication plan if it needs revisiting. Now we are ready to execute because we ticked the critical points to say we have checked the team is ready, the activities are in place, and they are specific, measurable, and they have the timelines attached to it, and they are realistic. So then you are ready to execute your project. Then on the execution, make sure that you continuously monitor the execution of the project in a way that you're always collecting data to see if the project is going according to plan. So as the team members with their responsibilities have been allocated, the responsibility that they've been allocated, as they execute on the project, as they do what they're supposed to do, you need to make sure that if you're a project manager in this case, you need to make sure that you collect data. You identify if there are any challenges that you can assist so that you make their job easier, or their project or their task easier, so that they will be able to complete those tasks within the specified period within budget, and meeting the objective of that particular activity. So data analysis becomes very, very important. You must always continuously collect data. In terms of, it doesn't have to be a complex project. I mean, sometimes when you're talking about collecting data, it sounds complicated. But maybe going back to the project that I was talking about earlier, when we were doing the planning, that let's say we are raising funding to set up a spaza shop, right? Now we did the business plan as part of the planning. Now we need to go raise funding. That's a part of execution. Remember, the business plan becomes part of the planning, right? And we have identified the risk. We went into detail in terms of identifying the risk for this project. We have identified the risks, and then we have identified the stakeholders, which are mainly the suppliers, the community, the funder, maybe one key one, it might be the builder, and the departments that's relevant to give us maybe the license, the necessary approvals like your zoning certificates and trading licenses. So those are our stakeholders for a project to build our spaza shop, right? We've identified them and they're still relevant. So we're happy with that. And we have identified the risks. That the biggest risk, I think we said, is that we might not be able to secure the funding, or we might appoint inexperienced or incompetent builder, or the customers might not buy from us. Those are some of the risks that we have identified. So as we execute this project, we keep those risks in mind to say it is possible that this risk may exist. So as we execute, we become very, very careful, and we keep those risks in mind as we make decisions. All right. So now we are raising funding. So what activities are there? Let's say the funding, it will be our business consultant that we have appointed that will do the facilitation of raising the funding. So the activities will be, we have already prepared the business plan. So the consultant will have to approach the funding institution to submit our application for funding. So now they go submit the application, then averagely they'll say maybe it takes 3 months. Okay, that's the best case. Depends if it's a bank or if it's a TFI, you might have to maybe budget 6 months because they're a little bit inefficient in their processes. Okay, the consultant does the first activity. We're executing the project, submits the business plan to maybe 4 or 5 potential funders. And okay, because there's nothing much that you can do in the process. So that means all the activities will have to wait for the feedback that we're going to receive from the funders. I mean, we already have our, if we already have our license to operate, the operating license, we have our zoning certificate ready. If we don't have, then those as well becomes the activities of the project. We submitted the application. While we're waiting for the application, we're engaging with the local municipality to say, we need permits, here are the building plans. We want to build a spaza shop. We start engaging with the potential suppliers to say, we're setting up a spaza shop, it will be this size, servicing this community. How much can you sell out the products to us? We're trying to negotiate the discount so that we can be competitive in the community. That is part of the engagement. That's part of execution. When you go to the suppliers, it's part of the execution. So that process must have the objective. It must be clear which suppliers are you going to approach. You must be measurable in terms of how many suppliers do you need to secure to make sure that this project, by the time the funder, remember the funder, once they receive the application, they're going to assess it and all that, and they'll come for what they call due diligence, to come see the project, to see if what you told them is true, right? To verify certain things, to maybe meet the community, to understand the dynamics in that area before they can fund you. Because most especially when you're looking for business funding, it's not like a personal funding where you just send documents and they approve. No, they need to do proper verification. They need to do proper due diligence. So now that we're still waiting for them to come. So we are fixing our house while they are assessing our proposal. We are engaging the government or the department, the relevant department. It might be economic development or environmental. It depends on the structure in the government because they change so often. Depending on the structure, who you need to be engaging on. So the activities that will be running concurrently with the funding application, it will be to finalize the zoning certificate, to get our operating license, to speak to potential suppliers in terms of supplying the stock at a reasonable price or a discount or at affordable prices. So those activities will run concurrently with the application process. But we can't start building because we don't have money. So in our scheduling, we would have put building after funding approval and signing of the loan agreements. So the actual building of the spaza will only commence after we've received the funding. But in the process, there are certain activities that will be happening. We'll be executing on those activities. So that's how the execution happened. You put your activities, you schedule them nicely to say, this one is going to take us 6 months to raise funding. But as we're raising funding, then there are certain things that we need to do to make sure that when the funder approves or when the funder think that there might be an opportunity, then they come and they want to do the due diligence. Then we get our house in order. We make sure that we prepare. We make sure that we have our things ready. So we're gonna do. We're gonna engage with the suppliers to see if they will give us good prices. We're gonna engage with government or the department to get our zoning certificate right and to get our what do you call it, an operating license. Okay, and we don't have to start recruiting employees because we only have 2, so we can do it while we started with the building after the approval from the funding institution. So maybe those activities we're gonna do them over the next 4 months, and then those activities will be completed, and what we'll be waiting for, it will be the approval from the funding institution. Then maybe it will be 2 months of waiting, and let's say like enough they come for due diligence maybe after 4 months. Then they come, and then that means it's an activity on its own, due diligence, because we might need the accountant to be there. So we might need the consultant, the accountant, maybe and the owner to be there when the funding institution come for due diligence. Then that's an activity on its own. So you need to make sure that it is in your project plan to say you're going to need these resources for due diligence. So if you're going to need maybe where you're going to meet. If you don't already have the building, you need to know where you're going to meet, and then how long it's going to take. Maybe it takes them 3 days. Some institutions take 3 days or so to. Okay, so you need to allocate the resources for that due diligence process. And remember, as you are executing the project, you need to make sure that you make the necessary. There might be adjustment. There might be certain things that are not happening according to plan. They are not taking place the way we thought they would be in the business plan. So in the process of executing, there are certain activities that might be adjusted. I mean, I was talking about the due diligence. We might be in the plan indicated that maybe the funding institution will come after 3 months. And maybe they didn't have too many deals that they were looking at. Then they come after 2 months. Now, that means there must be a reallocation of resources within the project, because to check who's the availability of the accountant and the availability of the consultant. So when you're executing, make sure that you are open-minded when it comes to the changes in the activities. The plan is there to guide you, but it doesn't mean it must be cast in stone. But you mustn't just change it willy-nilly. It must be with reason. If you are changing it, obviously, then it must be, you must have a project meeting where the proposed changes are being made. So you need to involve, let's say in this small project of ours of building the spaza shop, you must have the accountant involved, you must have the business consultant involved. And if we already have appointed the builder, then even the builder must be involved in any changes or any process, because if the funding institution is fast-tracking our application, that means the builder the funds might be approved earlier than we thought. And it means the builder might have to start before or earlier than we had agreed. So continuous stakeholder engagement becomes very, very important. So you must continually engage the stakeholders, inform them, provide them with update, consult them where it is needed, and even maybe the department where you applied for licenses, trade licenses or into rezoning, you need to make sure that you engage with them to indicate that our funder came early. Can you please maybe try to fast track, so that, because we wouldn't receive the money if we don't have the necessary compliance documents, because the funding institutions will not necessarily, okay, they can, but most of the time they don't fund you if you don't comply with the law of the country or the law of the land. So you need to make sure that you are compliant. So continuous engagement as you execute your project, it becomes very, very important. And make sure you not communicate with all stakeholders, because sometimes you might think, no, I'll let them know, whatever, it doesn't matter, but they will feel appreciated if you continuously give them updates, which is very, very important. And the next thing is that engagement will build the team spirit. They'll understand that you see them as part of the project, because if you leave the stakeholders out, they'll think that you just engaging them for the sake of compliance, not that you feel they are really part of their project. So if you continuously engage them, then it will make them motivate them and to make sure that they give you the necessary support. Okay, and then as well, when you're executing, okay, not the theory, but the practice is that you need to celebrate the milestone. As you're achieving the milestone, yes, you are building a spaza shop. I mean, it's not something fancy. But as we maybe get the team is coming for due diligence, you just call the team whatever and celebrate. Say, at least they're coming for due diligence, so that you give them that spirit, you motivate them, so that at least you celebrate the little things in the process, so that the project doesn't seem so daunting. So you must celebrate the little things that the little achievement, just to achieve milestone, get into the habit of celebrating so that it motivates the team. I know we have small team. We just you, the consultant, the accountant. Maybe the builder is becoming a key stakeholder, and maybe the suppliers. You can also advise them regularly on the progress of your application, so that they don't think that you are gone. If you keep quiet for too long, they might think that maybe you have abandoned the project. So keeping them in the loop, it will build good relationship with them going forward. Okay, and then as there are any changes that occur, make sure that you update your project plan or your execution plan, because now we're at the execution stage. So you need to make sure that the execution plan is updated regularly. And as I said, communication, keep the line of communication. If you have to meet regularly, you can meet regularly. It doesn't have to be physical, because now we have your Zoom, you have your Teams. So you can meet online, so that you just give them feedback. It doesn't have to be long meetings, but that regular engagement, it will keep your team motivated. All right, so what should be produced by the execution activities is one, the deliverables. Are we delivering on the things that we're supposed to be delivering on? Two, we need to have a register of the changes that have been made to the original, original project plan. Three, it needs to produce performance data. Are we performing the way we're supposed to be performing? So is the project on track? Are we, remember with our Spaza Shop project, are we getting the suppliers to commit to supplying us? Are we winning with the department for zoning? Are we winning with the department for giving us the trading license? Have we secured the builder? And then the funding process, is it going according to plan? So those are the performance data. How are we doing? So we need to perform those. Okay, we need to analyze that data to see if it's in line with our project plan. And then we track any issues that may come, that maybe we're missing certain documents and all that. So we must have a list of issues that we are tracking as the project team, to see these are the issues that we're experiencing during this project, and you are tracking them to say how far are they. So if there are any challenges, you need to be able to monitor to say how far are those issues that we have raised, and make sure that we keep documentation for our project, because without documenting the project, then becomes a challenge. Now, the strategies to successfully implement a project or execute a project. One, you must make sure that you use the project tools, because if without using the project tools, then you're not going to be using the best practices. So make sure that you follow the project management techniques and principles. So that will make sure that you successfully execute your project. Two, make sure that the delegation matrix are clear. The organogram of the project is clear. Activities that should be delegated are delegated to the relevant teams, and make sure if certain responsibilities are delegated, the teams must be given the right or the freedom or the space to make decisions, to think, to make decisions, so that you don't micromanage them if you give them responsibilities, right? And then you must make sure that you keep communication line open, so that if there are any issues, you know early in the process that there are issues, and you find a way to address those issues. And then you must have progress reports regularly, so that you make sure that everything is in order. And then obviously now you need to have those control activities in place. So a project must always have the control processes in place. Make sure that the project plan, you're following the project plan. If there are any diversions, you need to make sure that they are properly documented and approved by the project team, right? Now I'm in the controls. Then you make sure that you follow the project plan. Make sure that you follow the budget. Remember, you have set up the budgets. Make sure that you follow that budget, and there is a process to request funding. If there's money that's required, there must be a process for an individual to request the budget if required. Maybe the consultant has to travel and fly to see one of the funders in, let's say, Cape Town, for argument's sake. Then it needs to be properly requested and proper controls in place in terms of how you utilize the budget. Make sure that the administration of the project, you keep documentation and all that. So those controls, you need to make sure those controls are in place. The risk management processes, make sure that you follow the processes as you define them in your risk strategies. All right, and make sure that the communication is done the way it's supposed to be done. You have regular meetings as you're supposed to. Those are some of the controls that you should put in place to make sure that the project is executed the way it's supposed to be executed. Because without controls, then the project might not be executed the way it's supposed to be. You might be part of that 90% of 80% of projects that are either over budget or they are late. That mainly, the main causes are: one, poor planning, or poor execution, or poor controls. If you don't put controls in place, those are the other main contributing factor to project execution. So to make sure that you execute it properly, make sure that you maintain those controls. You make sure that there are controls and your team understand the controls that are in place, and make sure that they comply with all the relevant controls that you have put in place. Okay, so while we're talking about controls, there sometimes will be gaps with the project, right? You find maybe your sponsor is not actively involved. Maybe the goals between the stakeholders and you not coming to the party where the stakeholders are disgruntled. Maybe the employees are not, or the team members are not happy with certain things. Maybe there's a lack of communication within the project. Those things you must always keep your ear on the ground to make sure that you identify those gaps. There might be gaps where you thought you are aligned, but as the project progresses, then that alignment or that partnership or that relationship starting to break. So you must make sure that you have your ear in the ground to limit the gaps that might occur during the execution of the project. So you might have controls, but slowly as the project continues, sometimes you have performance issues, you have alignment issues, you have miscommunication, you have people losing interest in the project. So to make sure that you identify them early and you take corrective actions, because it's important not to let certain issues to continue for a long period of time, because they might negatively impact the project. That is on the control side. And then on the execution side, there's also the reporting part, right? You need to regularly report. Either you're reporting to the sponsors, to the team members, to stakeholders, or to whoever who might be interested in the project, and you are consulting the right people. So you must regularly communicate. And when it comes to communication, right, there are types of reports that you can issue from a project. And as I always say, that different projects, they have different requirements. So not all projects will have the same reporting reports or same reports that needs to be issued. But generally, there are about 6 reports that you can issue. It's one of the status report, right? It's where you giving status to the either project sponsor, customers, or stakeholders. You give them the update on what's happening to the project or the organization as a whole, or to the team members. That's a progress report. And then there's a project health report. Is the project healthy? Is it where it's supposed to be, and is it going the way it's supposed to be going? The status report is just where the project is. The health of the project is Is it the project at risk? Is the project where it's supposed to be? Or are we experiencing any weaknesses? Are the team still together? Are the stakeholders still with us? Our sponsors are they still with us in the project? So that's on the project health report. You are reporting on the project if it's still healthy. And then there's also a team availability report. Okay, our sponsorship project is not that big, so it's easy to do it. It's just the three of us, or maybe the four of us, including the builder. But sometimes you need to report on the availability of the team members, most especially if you are running big projects, where you need to know who's available when, and you have a calendar to make sure that even if you want to set up a meeting, you're not setting up a meeting during the time that some team members are not available. So you need to have a schedule of availability of your team, so that when you are planning things, you know when are they available. So you need to have that report, preparing that report on the team availability. There might be certain weeks where it will be convenient for everyone to meet, so you need to keep on updating that. But that might not be relevant to our sponsorship project. But if you are executing a mega project or big project, then the team availability report becomes very, very important. Okay, and then there's a risk report. Okay, ours as well, as I said, it's a small project, but we've identified our risk. Sometimes we need to regularly update the risk register to see if the certain risks are eliminated. Remember, I said we are on the execution stage, right? We are raising funding. We're going to start building soon. And certain risks will be eliminated from our risk register, like poor quality business plan. We're already past that stage. It's no longer a risk. If it has materialized, that means that risk has occurred. So when you're writing your risk report, you will mention to say, we had a risk that the consultant might not finish the business plan on time. It was a risk, then we have passed that risk. It didn't occur, or it has occurred, and this is how we dealt with it. Then we move forward in terms of the risk. So you need to issue or update your risk report regularly to make sure that the risks that you have in there are up to date and they are relevant to help you make decisions going forward. Okay. And then the other report that you might have to prepare if you are running a project is variance report. Basically, you have a budget, right? One, it might be on resources, on the team, or on the finances. Resources mean physical resources. So if there are any variances between the team availability or the team participation, or the resources utilized, or the funding utilized, you need to prepare the variance report, and you explain the differences, and you give the reasons why certain things were done in a certain way, or why do you have those variances. Okay, and the last report is on the time tracking report. You are tracking the time. Are we going to finish the project on time? Are we doing activities that we're supposed to do on time? If you're not doing them on time, then what actions have you taken to rectify the situation? So those are the type of reports that you can use to continuously give feedback to the team, to the sponsors, to your stakeholders. And communication becomes very, very important if you are running a project, so that we keep everyone on board and everyone knows what's happening with the project. So that is our last section on the implementation, control, and reporting. So we have addressed the three key components of this module. To say, on the implementation side, you need to have the execution plan. Make sure that your team is on board. Make sure that all the activities are scheduled. Make sure that all the resources are allocated. Make sure that the team members know what they're supposed to do. Make sure that your risk register is updated regularly. Make sure that your you're continuously engaging with your stakeholders and reviewing their participation, and make sure that if you do any changes, those changes are recorded. It's on the implementation side, right? And then there are certain things that the implementation must produce deliverables, must produce data on where you are, produce if you are meeting the objectives. And then we are on the other main component of this module. It was on the control side. The control side is, are you executing the project according to the plan? Are you following your risk management policies? Do you have the administration control on your project? Are you regularly engaging the stakeholders? Are you following your communication plans or your engagement plan? Those are some of the controls that you need to put in place. And as I said, that the putting controls in place will save you time. It will make sure that you execute your project on time, you execute it within budget, and it will make your stakeholder or your customer, whoever, or your sponsor happy, because you do things right, you do things on time, you do things within budget. And if you do that, then that will increase your brand, you'll increase your credibility out there in the market, because you'll be known as that company that do things right, they do things on time, they do things that they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do them. So the project management part, the implementation part, the execution part is critical, because as I said at the beginning of the lesson, to say sometimes we, as small businesses, we fight to get the contract, we work hard, we hustle to get the contract, but once you get the contract, we neglect the project implementation, we neglect the execution, and that's where now we lose our credibility. That's where now we lose our good brands in the market. That's where now we might start struggling going forward in securing the new business. So if you secure the project, make sure that you apply project principles. Make sure that you execute the project the way you're supposed to execute it. Yes, there's a lot of information on this execution, but just go through it, make sure you understand it, and use the Super Dealmaker application to develop your project and monitor your project. We made it easy for you to monitor your project on our application. And the last one that we spoke about is on the report. Regular reporting makes a difference when you're executing a project. Okay, not only when you're executing a project, but for a business, you need to know the type of reports that you need to issue, and issue them on time. Make sure that you are transparent in how you do things. Remember, one of the key principles of corporate governance is transparency. Make sure that you treat employees, your stakeholders, your project sponsors, you are always fair and transparent when you're dealing with them. And that comes with how you communicate with them. So make sure that if it's needed, know when, schedule them to say, I'm going to give certain the stakeholders maybe the status report, I'll give maybe the sponsor the health report in terms of where the project is. I'll always regularly share with the team the team availability report. And then I'll discuss with the team and the sponsors and even maybe the stakeholders. I'll discuss the risk report with them and issue it. And with the sponsors, you need to share the variance report to see where you are in your spending, in your resources, and compared to what you have budgeted for. And lastly, you need to make sure that you keep the time tracking report so that you can inform the stakeholders, you can inform the team members if you are falling behind, or if you're on time, or if you are ahead when it comes to time. So reporting is very, very important when it comes to the project. So I believe we've covered all the key components. We covered the implementation or the execution process. We've covered the controls, and we closed with covering the reporting and its requirement. I hope this lesson was valuable, and as an entrepreneur or business managers or project managers, you'll take it to heart and make sure that you implement these project principles. I thank you.